Hey guys, it's Katie, and it's time for another wrap up. So this time I've got 6 things for you guys instead of my 5 because I read a short story and I decided to count it. But I also read some other things that weren't books, so I might talk about those too. But primarily I'm just going to talk about the 6 bookish things I read. And let's just, I guess, jump right on in. So the first thing I finished since we last talked was The Hope of Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. That's a short story from his Cosmere world, but it's directly related to Elantris and a specific part of Elantris. You can read it in 2 different ways. You can either read it directly after a specific chapter, I forget which one it is at the moment, or you can just read it once you finish the book. If you don't remember, I read Elantris last year, and I'll link my review of that up above. I absolutely loved it. And the short story was really cute. I mean, there's not much to say that I can say because it's chock full of spoilers, but it was a really cute addition to the world. It wasn't my favorite thing I've ever read, but I thoroughly enjoyed that little expansion that we got to see in that short story. So next, I read and finished Circe by Madeline Miller. I loved this book. I absolutely loved Circe. It was so good, so phenomenally written. I actually did a review of that a while back, so I'll just link that up above for you guys too. But just kind of telling you briefly what it's about and then do my little short breakdown. Circe is a kind of Circe is kind of a biographical, I can't speak words. Circe is a biographical retelling of Circe's life. And it starts basically from the time that she was born, and it kind of leads up to and touches on significant events throughout her life, kind of a situation. Yeah, that's literally the gist of what it's about. But let's just kind of talk about all of the things. So the world building was, really well done, but it was mostly just kind of taking place in ancient Greece, but it was taking place over multiple centuries, basically, because Circe is a goddess and she's immortal. Who knew? And so it was just kind of world building, ancient Greece plus God things. Cool. It was really well done, enjoyable. Would recommend. The plot, I'm putting a disclaimer, it was not like this for me, but I know that for quite a few people out there, a lot of people might think it's slow because it is basically telling Circe's tale over centuries, and it gives you all of this kind of background information plus does stuff to move forward the plot as well, so it's kind of like a nice meshing. Madeline Miller also used a lot of names throughout the story, and I think that for some people, if you haven't read the myths or aren't familiar with the Iliad or the Odyssey in particular, you might be a little bit confused or lost because they're just kind of put there, and they do have significance. They actually have greater meaning, but if you don't know who they are, you're going to be like, why are you mentioning this random character in this one paragraph and then never bringing them up again? There is a reason for it, and as I said, if you've read the myths or other works, you will definitely understand them, but if you haven't, then you'll just be lost and confused. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a huge detractor because it's mostly about Circe and her interaction with certain people and her reactions and just experiences of different events throughout her life. So in retrospect and in the grand scheme of things, those little minuscule characters don't mean anything. They're just there for extra enriching factors, if that makes sense. Okay, great. The writing. The writing was absolutely stunning, absolutely beautiful. It just, as I said in my review, it really just feels like you're wrapped in a warm blanket, or waves lapping against your feet. Like, it's so calming and so soothing. And I just love the writing. It's that kind of writing that you just fall into and you just feel right at home in the story that you're reading about. So Madeline Miller's writing was just so well done. And then finally, the characters. The main character that we follow is Cersei. But Madeline Miller's strong point is actually writing characters, because even the characters that she only might have mentioned briefly or might have only been there for a short period of time, you felt like you knew them. And it was just so stunning. Like, it's a shortish book, at least by my standards. And the fact that she was able to do what she did in that period of time just blew me away. And I absolutely 125% loved it. Moving on to the third thing that I read, which I was kind of simultaneously reading with another book, but we're going to get there. Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Okay, so yes, I finally read Six of Crows, and I liked it, especially more than Grisha, but I didn't love it. I'm sorry to all of you guys who really, really wanted me to love it, but and I will plan on doing a full-blown review of it down the line once I've read and finished Crooked Kingdom. And so I'm kind of trying to reserve judgment until I've read and finished that, just so I can kind of get the full picture. But based on reading that first book alone, it wasn't the best thing I've ever read. Just putting that disclaimer out there. But I did like it. And the writing was significantly better than the Grisha trilogy. The world building, honestly, it was pretty non-existent. So basically, if you haven't read Grisha, and you decide to start with Six of Crows, you're just not gonna get the full picture. So I'm basically gonna say, if you want the world building, read Grisha and then come to Six of Crows. Otherwise, you're just not going to get any, because there really, really wasn't much. It was just building on the prior trilogy, even though this is technically a separate series. I mean, it's kind of like The Realm of the Elderlings, where it's like you're following different parts of the world within a larger world. You know what I mean? Okay, great. So it was really building off the first trilogy and just kind of like, oh, you know all of this already, so I don't need to go through it again. So I thought the world building was severely lacking. So that kind of definitely took away some of my enjoyment. Talking a little bit about the plot. The plot was sort of interesting enough. It was a heist kind of story, but at the same time, at parts it really dragged. And even when I was reading the heist, I just found myself drifting and just not really being as engaged as I wanted to be. I mean, during a heist book, it's supposed to be exciting and thrilling and wanting you to keep reading and keeping you on the edge of your seat, and I just really didn't get any of that. It was really a character-centric book, which I love, but it sacrificed the plot at its expense. And so there needs to be, I think, a little bit of a better balance there in order for it to be spectacular to me. And then talking about the writing. The writing was, as I said, significantly better than the Grisha trilogy. I wasn't dying inside, but there were times where I thought the writing was a little bit over the top. Like, some of the conversations and some of the dialogue were just a little bit over dramatic and extra, and I just felt very jarring. I'm also picky with the way that flashbacks are done. I actually really enjoy flashbacks, but I don't like them when they're done kind of in the middle of a scene, just kind of randomly. They just It's just so jarring. Like, you're like, oh, flashback, or wait, what just happened? Oh, we're experiencing something that happened a while ago. And it's just, there's no setup. They're just kind of like thrown in there. And so I just wasn't a fan of that. I don't know, just it was, as I said, it was significantly better, but there is still a lot of room for improvement. And I'm hoping to get that from some of the later books as we go on. And then finally, the characters. I really liked several of the characters. I didn't love all of them. Like, I did not really feel a deep connection to Inej. And while I liked Kaz in some respects, like I liked him in the beginning, as time went on, he got a little bit irritating and tiresome and predictable. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I really, really, really disliked Matthias, however you want to say it. I've heard it both ways. But I really didn't like him at all. I didn't connect to his character. I didn't care about his motivations. I didn't really care about him as a character. I was just like, you're an angry dude and you're racist, and I just can't help but like not, I just don't care. I really liked Nina. She was really interesting. She was probably one of the more fleshed out characters, and actually she was probably the most fleshed out character. She had the most interesting story. She had interesting motives. I did feel a connection to her. But my favorites were Jesper and Wylan. They kind of held the story up for me, and that's saying something because they aren't in it as much. I mean, it's told in these different perspectives, and each perspective is, you know, a different character, whatever, great. But they seem to have the least perspectives, and that made me sad because just their sassy banter was everything. And also, being me, I shipped them. Not like mega hard, like, oh my god, OTP of all OTPs. Like, you can't unseat the 9 that I have. Like, I have a ranking system. But I do enjoy them together, and I mean, well, I know some things because literally everyone and their mother talks about this series, duology, world. I know some stuff about them, but I just really, really liked them as characters. I really wish we got to see more of them. Like, I would be down with having a spin-off series just about the two of them, and like, that would be fine. I would totally be done with that. I mean, the thing that I've kind of noticed about Leigh Bardugo's world and her books are that I tend to like the characters that are less focused on, I don't want to call them side characters, because all of these 6 were, you know, kind of protagonists, but I guess the main 2 were Kaz and Inej. But I like the more side character peoples than the main characters for her books. And that might be one of my bigger issues with her world. It's like, I'm not invested in the characters you want me to be invested in. So, yeah, that's where I'm at for right now. It was enjoyable, but I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I was just kind of apathetic about it. There we are. Okay. Then, moving on to the next book. I read this alongside Six of Crows and I think some other ones. I don't even know. I read this book for a while. Like, it took me most of the month to get through. And that was Fear, Trump in the White House by Bob Woodward. Okay, guys, let's have some real talk. I know this is not normally the kind of content that I put out. I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but I had to read this book. I've kind of, if you don't remember, last year I read Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff. It was okay, nothing spectacular. It was whatever. It was just basically a regurgitation of the news. I did a review of that too, if you want to go see it. Honestly, not worth it. You can skip it. It's fine. But Bob Woodward's book, on the other hand, I would recommend it if you want to know more about the situation of the United States and things of that ilk. Because if you don't know who Bob Woodward is a well-renowned US journalist, and he's covered so much stuff. Kind of claim to fame, if you will, was basically cracking open the Watergate fiasco with Nixon. He had an actual writing partner for that one. His name was Bernstein. I forget his first name right now. But anyway, Bob Woodward was the lead journalist for the Washington Post that basically cracked that whole thing wide open. And ever since then, he's written just a lot of books on presidential scandals and just presidents in general, kind of done a psychological / sociological look at why things are a certain way that they are. Sort of. It's a complicated situation. It's fine. So what he did here is kind of a similar situation to what he did with Watergate. What he did is he got all these different sources, and they were kind of like, if you know who Deep Throat is from the Nixon fiasco, there was like an inside source person who remained anonymous for a very, very long time. We finally found out who he was a couple of years ago, actually. And they were just feeding these reporters information that was kind of crucial to a story that they were trying to write. So what Bob Woodward did for this book is he got all of these different sources, and he found out all kinds of stuff about kind of the behind the scenes situation of the Trump White House. And he's kind of started his book 6 years prior to 2016. So it was 2010. He decided he wanted to run, got Bannon in there, kind of started to set up this chessboard basically. And the way his book goes is he kind of just touches on all of these significant events throughout the campaign, pre-campaign, throughout the campaign, and then now in his presidency, all the way up to the beginning of 2018, I believe, because this book came out in October of last year, I believe. So he follows the first, quite a bit of his presidential situation, and it's kind of an inside look at everything by talking to all these sources and pulling on all of these articles and through his own research and whatnot. And he writes this almost narrative about things like conversations that were had and just Trump's reactions to certain things and people staffers in the White House and their reactions to things. So it's kind of Trump's overall relationships with the people around him and how things kind of played out the way they did, and just kind of everything. The news reports it one way. What I like about this is it kind of gives you another side to the story. And I mean, that's one thing I really like about reading stuff like this. I mean, I thought the same thing about Fire and Fury last year when I read it. It's the news and articles and all of these other things present a certain story in a certain way, but then you start looking for other resources and you get a different side. But I really, really liked this book. It pretty much kept me engaged the entire time because of the way he told it. He's a very, very captivating writer. And that is honestly where the entire thing shone, that, plus the interactions between Trump and everybody was just really interesting. Because I mean, as I said, we've seen clips and things here and there, but we don't know the behind the scenes stuff that well or that much. And so it's definitely an interesting insight to the mess that is the United States right now. So if you're interested at all, and you want to know more about things like that, I definitely recommend picking it up. It's also very eye-opening. Like if you've been hiding under a rock for however many years it's been at this point, and you just are trying to pretend like things don't exist or are deluding yourself, still, like, pick it up and you'll see how scary things actually really are. So I'm gonna tell you, if you pick up any book about him, let it be this one. It's, as I said, out of the ones that I've read, which I've only read the two, this one is the better option. Bob Woodward knows his stuff. He knows what he's doing. And I'm just a fan. So yeah. The next book I read was Green Rider by Kristen Britton. And this book really disappointed me. I did something that I don't normally do, and I built it up to be something in my head. And so going in, I had this like expectation of what it was going to be, and that it was going to be like my new favorite thing in the world, and that I was just gonna love it to pieces. And as I said, I normally don't do that. I normally just kind of go in with pretty low expectations, or just kind of no expectations whatsoever. And so all the things that I just mentioned did not come to pass. I was just not impressed. It took me over a third of the way through to kind of finally start to settle into it. And then I wasn't fully invested ever. Well, I wasn't like invested enough to care until like the 60 way mark, so like 2/3 of the way through. But by the end, I did end up liking it, but it's not my new favorite thing. So let's just start to talk about it. So basically, if you don't know what this book is about, this young girl named Kerrigan Gladian, and she is a merchant's daughter. She gets kicked out, suspended from school for winning a fight with a higher up in status person, whatever, he's irrelevant. And she's just kind of chilling in the forest when all of a sudden this rider comes by, and he's shot with 2 arrows, and he's basically on his deathbed. And she, he basically dies in her arms, but before he does, he makes her swear that she will deliver this important message to the king, no matter the cost. And she becomes this person called the Green Rider, or called a Green Rider. And the Green Riders are basically messengers of the king. They do a lot more than that, but that is the gist of their duties. They do a lot of fighting things too, but they're mostly messengers. And she has this cool horse, who we later find out is named Condor, but she literally calls horse for like 90% of the book. It's fine. So basically, after she takes on this persona, she just goes on this giant quest thing in order to try and get this message to the king, and a lot of stuff happens to her along the way. And I mean, a lot of stuff happens to her along the way. And so let's just kind of go into my normal thing. So basically, the writing was mediocre. The pacing just was really off. It just felt too rushed. She was trying to put too much into the book, and it was just not flowing well. Everything felt off and jarring, and things weren't explained very well. Like how she got from point A to point B, sometimes it was just like, where did this come from? Or how did this even, what? Like, this doesn't make any sense. It got better as the book went on, but as I said, about the first half, it was just a mess in terms of the pacing and just explaining and descriptions and things. So that was really difficult to get through at times. So the writing, as I said, was okay, but it wasn't special. But it did, as I said, get a little bit better as time went on. The plot was really interesting. I actually liked the premise of the book. It's what drew me to it in the first place. And as I said, it was just, the author had great ideas. She just, I think, struggled executing it, at least in my mind. I just wasn't seeing, it was not believable. It was not all there for me. But the plot really was the thing that was keeping me going, which is really rare for me when it comes to books. It's normally the characters that are keeping me going, but the plot was the thing that was really keeping me going here. So that is definitely something that it's got going for it. It just had trouble executing these really cool ideas for large chunks of time. And when it comes to the world building, that was also a little bit rough. You can kind of pretty much tell it's just kind of your typical medieval setting, but it just wasn't, it all goes to the execution factor and the pacing factor. It just, parts of it just didn't work or were unbelievable or were just weird, and it just didn't work for me. I mean, like, normally this kind of a book would be like 125% my stuff. Like, and I'll tell you a personal story in a second, but this book literally would be right up my alley normally, but just the stuff that I'm mentioning really, really detracted for me. Plus, as I said, my own personal expectation, which was through the roof, which I just, as I said, normally don't do, really impacted my ability to enjoy. Because when it didn't live up to the expectations, I was just like battling this severe disappointment with, you know, just continuing to read. Like, it was a struggle, but I got through it pretty quickly because I wanted to, kind of a thing. Like, I didn't want to stay in it because it was just irritating me. It's a situation, but we'll get there. Anyway. As I said, the world building, as I said, was interesting in parts. Like, some of the magic was interesting, like the later stuff. And just explaining certain things, like the fact that she was a merchant and a merchant's daughter, and like that was really interesting to hear, and just kind of some of the history of the Green Riders and their duties and their whole purpose kind of thing. That was kind of interesting, but a lot of it just didn't get explained until the end. Like, if it was explained as kind of time went on, that would have been better, but instead it was just like kind of all of this random information that we would have benefited from earlier, just was kind of shoved towards the end, and I just wasn't digging it. I mean, yeah, it's nice to have that like mystery kind of situation every once in a while, but she just didn't do it well. And I mean, it hurts because I really wanted to like this book. And then last is the characters. And there were some characters I enjoyed, but there were also some characters that I was just like, I don't care at all about you. And sadly, one of those characters was our main character. I really did not care about Kerrigan for the majority of the book. I just thought she was annoying. She kept saying the same like 3 phrases over and over again. I'm like, yes, I get it. You're not a Green Rider. You don't identify with this. You don't know blah, blah, blah. I have to deliver this letter. Like, I get it. I get it. You don't need to say it over and over again. So it was just very tiresome and very repetitive after a while. But like, that coupled with all of these like crazy side quest things that she just like somehow managed to get out of it. It was really messy. But some of the other characters that we met down the line, or like even throughout, were really interesting. I just wish I got to know them a little bit more. I wish I knew what their kind of purpose was a little bit better than was explained. It was just, as I said, it was just kind of all over the place until the last like third. The last third was like good. If the whole book was like the last third, I would have really, really enjoyed it. But it wasn't like that. But there were even parts of the last third that were still like messy, and I'm just like, I don't understand. But it was still significantly better than the first 2/3 of the book. So you might be wondering, why am I so bitter about this? Because I mean, as I said, like I didn't end up hating it. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. I was, once again, pretty apathetic about it. But you might sense that I am a little bitter. And that literally all has to do with my personal expectations that were through the roof. It is no fault of anyone except for me, because of the premise. So, long story short, I ended up writing a story that was very similar to this a long time ago. When I was, I don't know, high school maybe. And I was very, very proud of my story. Like, it was just something that I just really enjoyed. I read it a while back, and it definitely has some issues. And by some issues, I mean a lot of issues. Like, there are a lot of great ideas, but it's just, yeah, it's weird. I don't know how to describe it any better than that. But I had these expectations kind of extra high, because it was like, okay, this is like something that I wrote, and it's gonna be, because like I have this personal connection, and because it sounds like something that's right up my alley, I'm gonna love it. And like, it's gonna be my next favorite thing. There's like 6 books in this series. Let's go, I'm ready. And when I started it and got like a couple of chapters in, I was just like, okay, I'm not loving this. And then it just kind of went downhill from there until we actually shifted a perspective at one point, like just kind of in the middle. And that is kind of what really started to pull me in. Like, I was really interested in that perspective, like just that chapter in particular. It was the most invested I was in the whole book at that point. And so I was like, okay, now we're getting into this a little bit more. Maybe there's some hope. And then we shifted back to Kerrigan, and I was like, I don't care. But then we got to the later parts of the book when we actually met the king and several of the other people in that portion of the kingdom. They were just, it just added a lot more, and it was really interesting. But I don't know, it just, for the most part, it just didn't work. But as I said, a lot of it just had to do with my expectations being set so high. And now I'm wondering if I would even like the Remnant Chronicles, because I kind of had some similar expectations about that one, because from the blurbs, my story was basically Green Rider meets the Remnant Chronicles and squishes into one thing. Now, I haven't read the Remnant Chronicles yet, but based on the blurb, like, that is the gist of what my thing was. So I'm just either gonna go into the Remnant Chronicles with like super, super low expectations and expect to be disappointed, because I've heard so many mixed things about that series, or I might just skip it. Let me know down below, like, based off of the things that I've been saying here, if you think I'd enjoy it. Because as I said, the premise sounds interesting, but I just don't, especially right now, I just don't need that kind of disappointment. The last book I'm going to talk about is The Book Knights by J.G. McKinney. And this is basically a dystopian Arthurian retelling. If that sounds weird to you, it is a little bit weird. It's kind of like Fahrenheit 451 meets Arthurian legend. That's the best way to describe this book. Also, the characters are like super young in this book, and I kind of wasn't expecting that going in. It just was another book that I was just like meh about. So basically what it is it is a world where books are banned because words have power. Words are the magic. Like, not just like reading from a book, but like specific words and poems, I think it is really in particular, are what gives a person the power to do magic and the things in the world. So books are banned and they are burned if they are found. So the way this book starts is with Arthur Pendragon, like, you see the similarities. The names were similar. Is at home with her parents. Her parents kind of get taken and their entire library gets burned. And Archie ends up going to the Isle of Avalon as kind of a refuge. And there she meets all kinds of people and basically kind of is trying to find out how she can save her parents in one way or another. And it all has to do, once again, with books and the power of the words and writing and things. It's a really interesting take, but it's also really weird because it's like modern dystopian, and I just really wasn't expecting that for this kind of an Arthurian retelling. Like, I've seen modern retellings and things like that, but like dystopian Arthurian retellings, just super weird to me. But it was enjoyable, at least more enjoyable than the Green Rider. I'm a little bitter about that still, sorry. So yeah, that's kind of like the gist of that book. Just really brief. The writing was, it was okay. It was very simplistic. The world building, as I said, was really interesting, but also just weird. But I liked it anyway. I have mixed feelings about the world building, but as I said, it was dystopian and kind of like weirdly modern dystopian, but also interesting because banned book situations is just always an interesting trope for, book readers. And then the plot, also similar, like pretty interesting. It's very similar to a lot of like Arthurian tellings and things. So, I mean, if you know Arthurian legends, then you kind of sort of know some of the plot points. There were definitely a lot of interwoven things from the original myths into this interesting world. And so it was just kind of like seeing that nice blend. And then finally the characters, they were okay. Some I liked more than others. I was not a huge fan of certain portrayals of certain characters. Like, I really didn't like the portrayal of Merlin. I also actually wasn't a huge fan of the portrayal of Arthur or Artie. So, I mean, it was just kind of like a nice blend once again. So, I mean, it was just kind of a little bit here that kind of kept my interest, but it wasn't one specific element that I really loved. So yeah, those are the 6 book things that I read since I last talked to you, and there was a lot of kind of like mediocre feelings about books this time. The only 2 books that I really loved this go around were Circe and Fear, Trump in the White House. The others were just kind of like mediocre or like only okay. I also kind of like in the middle of this whole thing got into a bit of a, I don't want to call it a slump because it's like not, because I was still reading things. I kind of alluded to it at the beginning of the video. I reread one of my favorite Merlin Arthur fanfics. If you're interested, hit me up because it's a really, really phenomenal fic. I promise, it's really good. Anyway, and that kind of sustained me when I needed it, because just February is usually a difficult month for me. Anyway, that's about all I've got. So if you guys have read any of these or are planning on reading any of these, feel free to let me know down below and we can talk about them a little bit more. But other than that, That's all I've got. You know the drill. And I have all of my social media links down below in the description. I have a Twitter, which is @ASeaOfTones, which is the same as my handle here if you guys want to come chat with me over there. Of course, I always have my Goodreads linked down below if you want to come over there and see what I'm reading and how I'm feeling about things, even though star ratings are arbitrary. Feel free to do that as well. But other than that, I'll catch you later in another video, and I will see you guys later. Bye!